Today I want to talk about the PHP Southwest lightning talks that I went to see and I spoke at on April the 11th. Now I know that this video is a long time coming and I did promise this video, but we're doing freelance month in April, so I'm going to just let that continue and then this gets released after that. So I am recording this video very early after the PHP Southwest talks. Now there were 8 talks, so this video might be a little bit long, so I do apologize. I'm going to be talking about each one. I found them incredibly insightful and useful and interesting talks. So we were at Desk Lodge in Bristol, and the room was, it was pretty interesting. You had a tree in the middle of the room. The room was fairly big. There was about 70 or so attendees there. So speaking was it was good. It was good fun. I personally enjoyed it. Before I start, I do apologize. I'm going to be mispronouncing names left, right, and center here. The first one was Static Site Generators by Drew Mclellan, and that was a very good talk because not only did that teach me that there were more static site generators out there than just the very few that I knew of, and I have. As you might be aware of, I've done a lot of stuff in Jekyll RB before, but there was also mentions of PHP static site generators too. And Drew really did cover a lot of points around the pros and cons of using static site generators, so that was fantastic. He also got a lot of feedback from Twitter that he demonstrated on the talk too, which I thought was a good sort of different way of presenting a talk. The second talk, and this is where I'm definitely going to be mispronouncing names, is Jerguš Lejko. I hope that's right. That was How Not to Be a Cool Developer. So that was a very interesting talk. Lots of code to digest in that talk. It was pretty much about SPA, single page applications, and how to use those within a server sort of technology. Very, very useful. Really looking forward to getting hold of the slides in that talk. The next talk was by Martin Joyner, Speedy Seeding for Load Testing. Again, another really good talk. This was a live demo, so that was pretty awesome. And this was all about how you can put in lots of data really quickly. So I think he had something like 10,000 plus records. He demonstrated how you would do it normally and it would be really, really slow. And then he had his own tool that is on, I believe, GitHub, that you can use to really speed up the load testing. Now, load testing on lots of data is really tricky because ideally, after each test, what you want to do is tear down your data and then add the data again, especially if you've manipulated that data within the tests. Because what you want to do is have clean data sets for every test. It needs to be repeatable, right? But of course, if you're putting in tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of records every time, then that becomes a humongous overhead. So Martin's tool is extremely useful because it means that you can really speed up your tests. Because when your tests become really long to run and take ages to run, you end up just not running them because it becomes a problem, it becomes a bind. I'm going to find out the tool and I'm going to link it down below as well in the description. So if you want to check that out, then please do so. After Martin's talk, we had my talk. I'm going to talk about that later on. Then we had Bad Tech Tests by Lucia. Again, I'm very sorry if I've mispronounced your name. Very, very good. That was a talk that I related to a lot because it was all about going in for interviews and having bad tests, right? So when you're having bad technical tests in an interview, I'm pretty sure we've all had one, but the way this was presented was fantastic. Not only did this not have any slides with it, so she was actually talking from a script, but it was the way she presented it. It was like this. It was a story. So every example had a story. She used different animals to have like the interviewer and the interviewee, or the test and the examiner, and she made up the names. It was fantastic. It was just so relatable. I've had some really awful tests in my time, and these struck a chord. Now what I would really like to see is like an illustrator getting hold of her script and turning that into perhaps a storyboard, like a sort of an XCD sort of comic strip, if you will. And also the way she was talking about the animals and stuff, giving them characters so you kind of knew what they were, their personalities were like, that kind of thing. You could really grab that with an illustrator and run with it. And if you are having interviews for development jobs, then I highly recommend checking out that talk, because it kind of gives you an insight as to some of the bad tests. The next talk was by Nigel Dunn. Very good talk. It was all about not using the Git command line. And I must say, this really did hit me because, well, he demonstrated a GUI, right? A GUI to help you navigate and explore Git, and also to see how the Git repository has got into a particular state, right? So you could actually look as a visual representation of where your source code is. And personally, well, when I was at FastHost, when I was a developer at FastHost, I was studying my LPIC, which is the Linux Certified Professional Institute certification, blah, blah, blah. And I took it as a challenge not to use GUIs. It was kind of a way of me learning, and I was trying to learn in kind of like the hard way, is by replacing all of my GUI type things as best as I could using the command line. And I was on a Windows machine at the time, but I was using a VM with, I think it was Ubuntu, maybe Fedora, I can't remember, the operating system, and I was using that as a means of just developing the applications at FastHost. And that was really challenging, but I kind of fell into the trap of being a command line snob, because it was like, no, I don't want to use a GUI. I want to challenge myself. I'm learning LPIC, so I don't want to do that. So I moved away, and I've done a talk before on this channel about why I don't use Windows anymore as a development machine, because of all the command line stuff that I use. But there was a particular slide in Nigel's talk which really blew me away, and it really made me feel like, yeah, I'm a snob and I need to stop this, because he demonstrated like a map, and it was the directions. So the directions were all in words. They were like wordies. So if someone asks you how do you find the directions to the nearest pub or to the train station or whatever, you could either give them a set of instructions in the sense of just text, right? Which is basically what the command line is. Or you could show them a map, right? So which one are you going to go for? You're not going to go for the wordy one, are you? Because it's going to be talking about all the road signs and all the road signs and the roundabouts that you don't necessarily care about. With the map, you can actually see where you are, where you need to be, and which streets you're going to have to go down. The actual direction and so forth. It's more of a visual thing. So that really made me feel like, yeah, there is a place for GUIs, and there is a good place for GUIs. So I hope that I've come away from that talk feeling like I'm less of a snob for command line stuff. I think there is a place for both, and I think that was a very good talk that demonstrated that. The next talk was by Vítor Brandão. I'm so sorry, I really am sorry. This was Devkit, by the people, for the people. Very good talk. Now the crux of this talk was all about writing applications that can be ran and are user-friendly to the whole team, right? And a very good point in this talk was, well, if you've got, say, an application that you deploy using, say, Ruby, but the application is written in PHP, then you've immediately put a barrier of entry, because if a new person comes to your development team and they've applied because it's a PHP job, but they discover that in order to actually download the scripts or the database, they have to run command line stuff, maybe Bash, maybe even C, maybe Python scripts, maybe JavaScript, and that's not really what they've applied to do, then that in itself is a barrier of entry, right? So this made me think. I deploy a lot of stuff using Capistrano. Capistrano is Ruby, so I do know a small amount of Ruby just to get me by, but there's no need for that. You could have that application in in PHP, perhaps. Also, there is a ton of scripts that I've got in Python. I could just use the Symfony console. So the thing is, on the flip side, of course, there is you use the language that best suits the needs at that particular time. But you just have to be aware that when you're doing that and you're using different languages, then you are putting up these barriers. And not only that, but there's all, documentation as well. So he talked about documentation and how things should be documented, how things should be done so it's accessible for other people, not only developers, but also just other general people on the team. The last talk was by Andy Gale. This was Development Dinosaurs. You just need to see it, really. So Andy used a toy dinosaur as a way of annoying the development team that he runs to keep reminding them to do reports and tickets and so forth. So again, this was a live demo where he would commit something and then the dinosaur would roar because the commit message was written in the wrong format. Very, very good. Again, I'll put links to those in the description down below. My talk was right in the middle. That was all about using a framework or not. So what I attempted to do was pose an argument as to why you shouldn't be using frameworks and why you should be using frameworks in different circumstances. So I took it from the learner's perspective and then the perspective of writing an application that is production ready. Then I touched upon the differences between micro frameworks and monolithic frameworks. And then after that, it was kind of some tough questions to ask yourself whether or not you are going to roll your own, or whether or not the framework that you choose is actually a good thing to use for the application that you're developing. On a personal level, that was pretty terrifying, but I'm so glad I did it. I'm really happy that I did. And I, again, got the buzz afterwards and during the talk. I personally found that it flowed, or I at least thought that it flowed better than the first talk that I gave at PHP Southwest. One thing I would like to say, if you are thinking about doing speaking, is that please don't think that these 10-minute talks are sort of like the poor man's full conference talk. These are actually quite challenging to do, at least that I feel, because the topics like bad tech tests or speedy seeding for load testing or static site generators, or even the talk that I did, the using a framework or not, they are actually humongous topics, and you need to sort of like condense down your thoughts down into 10 minutes. So if you think about it like, if you do a slide for a minute or a slide for 30 seconds, that's not really a lot of slides. And you obviously want to talk about the specifics, right? Because you can't go off on tangents because these are only 10 minutes long. So these are actually quite challenging. So one thing that I've come away from this, and I know I've only done 2 talks, is that these are actually sort of good platforms or springboards, if you will, to bigger talks. And I would be very interested to see these speakers do these talks in a sort of a bigger sort of area, have more room to breathe, more discussion points, more insight on the code, that kind of thing. It was a very good evening. I really enjoyed myself. I have thoughts for future talks, and I would like to do that talk again that I did, perhaps at other user groups too. Now I'm going to be leaving links down to the individual talks and their slides, if I can find them, in the description down below. Also, all the tools that were mentioned and used. So if you're interested in the speedy seeding that Martin Joyner was doing, or if you're interested in the Git tool that Nigel Dunn was mentioning and the Devkit stuff, then do check them out as well. And if you do have an opportunity to see these speakers, then I do highly recommend it. Thanks ever so much for watching. Happy coding, everyone. I'll see you again soon. Cheers. Bye.